If you find this summary helpful, start with a free trial for podcast summaries on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for detailed summaries. Andrew and his wife, Ji-hee, were both CIA officers who were tasked with finding a mole within the agency. This mole was believed to be working for a foreign adversary, known as Falcon, and was feeding them sensitive information about the CIA's operations. Andrew and Ji-hee were sent to a neighboring country, Wolf, but they knew they would have to operate in Falcon as well. They were given a primary objective of building a new team in Falcon and collecting intelligence, but they also had a sub-objective of finding the mole. The CIA had been warned about the mole by a foreign ally, but they didn't have enough evidence to take action. Andrew and Ji-hee were essentially being used as bait to tempt the mole to make a mistake, which would allow the CIA to catch them. But here's the thing. Andrew and Ji-hee knew that they were being sent into a hostile country with a mole who could potentially reveal their identities and put them in danger. They also knew that the CIA was putting their lives at risk by creating operations that would tempt the mole to disclose their identities. Ji-hee, who has anxiety, was particularly concerned about the risks, including the possibility of being disappeared or killed by a foreign adversary. Andrew, on the other hand, saw this as an opportunity to prove himself and get a second chance in the CIA. They were both aware of the risks, but they also knew that they couldn't turn down the operation. As Andrew said, you don't really turn down an operation. If you're invited to take part in an operation, you have the right to say no. But if you say no, you're committing career suicide. So, they went ahead with the operation, knowing that they were taking a huge risk. But what's interesting is that Ji-hee shifted thinking about how their operation could be reverse-engineered by Falcon, and how they could stay one step ahead of the enemy. She shifted architecting a plan to foil their aggressors and protect themselves. This is where things get really interesting, and we'll continue to explore this story further. The CIA was trying to catch a mole who had access to all of their legacy intelligence sources. To do this, they needed to create new operations that the mole wouldn't have access to, and that's where Andrew and his team came in. They used a technique called dry cleaning to clear their path before entering the enemy country, which involved creating a cleansing route through a neutral country to avoid being tracked. They also used a technique called dead drops to exchange information with other spies. Andrew's role was to source information that his partner, Ji-hee, would use to identify targets. From there, they would use that information to build a case against the mole. But things took a turn when Andrew's presence in the enemy country became known to the local government, and they dispatched a surveillance team to track him. Andrew realized he was being surveilled when he noticed multiple people following him in multiple vehicles, and he used a technique called surveillance detection to confirm his suspicions. This was a terrifying moment, but also a comforting one, because Andrew knew that the surveillance team didn't know that he knew he was being followed. The game of espionage is a complex one, and it's clear that Andrew and his team were playing with high stakes. They were using techniques that had never been exposed before, and they were taking risks that could have had serious consequences. But their goal was to catch a mole and protect their country's secrets, and they were willing to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. Andrew is talking about being followed by a surveillance team, and he's trying to figure out how to escape. He's using a technique called a surveillance detection route, which is a predetermined route that he's taking through the city to try to expose the surveillance team. He's also using a coded message to communicate with his teammate Ji-hee to let her know that something's wrong. The coded message is just a simple phrase, "I'm coming home early," which doesn't seem suspicious to anyone listening in, but it's actually a signal to Ji-hee that Andrew's in trouble. Ji-hee then starts looking for any information that might indicate what's happening to Andrew, and she's checking all the usual channels, like cables and databases, to see if there's any reporting on someone being captured or something going wrong. Meanwhile, Andrew is trying to plan his escape, and he's using a technique called self-rescue, which means he's trying to get himself out of the country without any help from his team. He's also trying to collect as much information as he can about the surveillance team, so he can use that information to his advantage later. One of the things that's really interesting about this conversation is the way that Andrew and Ji-hee are using coded messages and secret communication channels to talk to each other. It's like they're speaking their own language, and it's really clever. But it's also a bit scary, because it shows just how much surveillance is going on, and how easy it is for people to be tracked and monitored. Andrew also talks about how the CIA operates fake companies, and how they use those companies to collect information and conduct operations. He says that the CIA has businesses that are wildly profitable, and that they use the profits from those businesses to fund their operations. He also mentions that the CIA has approached social media companies and asked them to share information about their users. It's a bit disturbing, to be honest, because it shows just how much power the CIA has and how easily they can access our personal information. But at the same time, it's also kind of fascinating because it shows just how sophisticated and complex the world of espionage is. Andrew also talks about how people are conditioned to believe that they have privacy, but that's not really true. He says that technology is not private, and that anyone can access our information if they want to. It's a bit of a wake-up call, to be honest, because it makes you realize just how vulnerable we are in the digital age. Andrew talks about how the CIA knew that he was coming on the show today, and how they probably knew what he was going to talk about. He says that the CIA has people who monitor social media and emails, and that they can access our personal information if they want to. It's a bit creepy, to be honest, but it's also kind of fascinating, because it shows just how much power the CIA has, and how easily they can access our personal information. So, let's dive into some of the key takeaways from this conversation. One of the most interesting points that Stephen Bartlett made was about the concept of head trash, those negative thoughts that we all have about ourselves that can be incredibly debilitating. He shared how the CIA teaches its officers how to deal with head trash, using techniques like box breathing and visualization to calm the nerves and reduce cortisol levels. But what's really fascinating is that the CIA also conditions its officers to be loyal and needy of outside validation, which can create a strange dynamic. Stephen shared how he used these techniques during his interrogation at the airport, using mirroring and silence to counter the interrogator's attempts to get him to reveal more than he wanted to. And what's really interesting is that these techniques can be useful in everyday life. Whether it's in negotiations, dealing with hostile employees, or just trying to get more information out of someone. The conversation also touched on the idea of burning an alias, when a cover identity is compromised and can no longer be used. Stephen shared how he and his team assessed that his alias, Alex Hernandez, was burned after his encounter with the mole, and that he could never go back to Falcon again. But what's really